President Cyril Ramaphosa also disputes that the ANC's top six did nothing to prevent the collapse of the passenger rail agency of South Africa. He was responding to questions at the state capture inquiry relating to the poor performance of the state-owned agency. Ramaphosa adds the claims are inconceivable.
I must dispute this notion that the top six would have done nothing about all this so that the board can be collapsed. I must dispute that, because to me that is the realm of dark arts. It's too dark and too deliberate. And how could an ANC deliberately say that we will not do anything because we want the board to collapse? To me, it's inconceivable.
Ramaphosa adds that the deployment committee may simply influence appointments but doesn't have the final say.
The real safety for the process is that the deployment committee is not the appointing entity. You may well say influence. Yes, political party will always seek to influence. Precisely what you were also saying, that maybe if you want to influence, do it transparently. And I would buy into that. Do it openly and say, we support this one and that one. And in the end, even the public does get involved sometimes when there's nominations for judges or top positions. They will say, this one is preferable, and when that person has not been appointed, there's an outcry that, they left out this one, and so on. So, influence, yes, but appointment, no. Because in the end, the ANC Deployment Committee is not the appointing structure.
Now, the president maintains he was in the dark about the extent of state capture until revelations were made in the media.
Many of the incidents of corruption that would in time be described as state capture became known to me as they did to the general public through the work of journalists, civil society organizations, and institutions such as the Public Protector and Auditor General. Reports of court cases and disciplinary proceedings, together with the commendable work of investigative journalists and whistleblowers, did help to give insight into corruption in both government and in the private sector. As it became increasingly clearer through the so-called Gupta leaks and other revelations, that a network of individuals was seemingly colluding with a number of people in government to occupy key positions and capture key institutions, the question that arose was how best one should respond to all this.
To help me unpack what came out today from the proceedings, I'm joined now by energy expert Ted Bloom, as well as political analyst Professor Hanyane and Sanusha Naidu. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time. Prof. Hanyane, what do you make of the head of state's performance today at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture? I mean, would you summarize it as, I saw something, or maybe I didn't see all of it, yet I did nothing about it and I said nothing. I didn't even resign because I didn't see what it will benefit for me to resign.
Good evening, Thabo. Good evening to your viewers, to my panelists as well. Look, I think it's a way of acknowledging and confirming for once that he couldn't do anything. He couldn't do anything because, by and large, there's Ramaphosa, the person, the politician who has ambitions, and those are being realized today. He is the president. He needed to play it safe so that one day he can rise to the first office, and that has happened. Unfortunately, it contributed to the opening of the back door for all sorts of malfeasance And here we are today paying testimony to some of the incidences and cases of the same. If you take the reference that the top 6 knew about what was going on in Prasa and they tried to intervene, why is it that today tracks are missing, infrastructure is damaged, rail services are somewhat of a lackluster kind of a reality? So we are sitting with, unfortunately, the beginning of the acknowledgement that the era of denialism in the ANC has begun.
Yeah. Ted, what do you make of the revelation today that the deputy president then could have probably whispered in the ear of the president as to who should be the group CEO at Eskom?
I think I agree with the professor that there seems to be some sort of game playing or strategic positioning by not only the president but also other people within the power structures of the ANC. And for the president to say that he was shocked or frightened by the revelations that were put to him sound to me a little bit strange. Let me just give you one example, one very clear example. It was no secret that in 2007, when the winning tenders for Medupi were announced, that Chancellor House was in the pie. Chancellor House was the investment arm of the ANC. Yeah. Chancellor House got to that position through a very opaque power play game. And Chancellor House, in my version, which unfortunately has not gone to Zondo, because Zondo only starts after Chancellor House issue in 2010, and this happened in 2007. I believe that Chancellor House was not only instrumental in getting itself involved in Medupi, but also was involved, indirectly at least, in getting the Kusile power station awarded without a tender. Most people don't know that, but Kusile was awarded without a tender to the same participants as the Medupi tender. So, that was clearly state capture, call it by any other name, but it was clearly state capture. And for the president in the circles that he moves in, which are far higher than I would ever be able to dream of moving in, for them to not know what is going on the ground, I find it very, very difficult. Certainly, my alarm bells went off at that time. And when I started making noises within Eskom about the corruption and the misalignment of actions, I was quickly dumped. I was dumped within 24 hours.
Now, Ted, is there any clarity now as to what the position was of the deputy president at the time at Optimum?
Well, the president only got involved with Optimum a bit later, but and that is after the consortium of management bought Optimum, and this is another interesting aspect. So the management of BHP Billiton at that stage, Energy Division, bought Optimum, but and they'd arranged finance for that, a lot of finance. But that finance was never called on, because within weeks of having so-called purchased Optimum, there was an engagement between the new owners of Optimum and Eskom, allegedly over a weekend, where the Optimum coal price was doubled on the basis of hardship. And it's strange that that is also something that's come forward during the tenure of Optimum under the Glencore stable, of which Mr. Ramaphosa was chairman, or allegedly chairman, or involved as a stakeholder. Again, the issue of trying to increase the Optimum coal price to Eskom on the basis of hardship was tendered. Ironically, it didn't succeed at that stage. But then when the Guptas took it over, again, the issue of hardship came up. And it was accepted by Eskom at that stage. So, sometimes games happen in front of your eyes, and positions and maneuvers happen in front of your eyes. And I can accept that maybe the president will say to you that he was a very busy man and he wasn't watching all the moves. But to claim total ignorance of the moves, I would find very, very difficult, unless if one is perhaps based overseas or something like that. I doubt whether you could be based in South Africa and be exposed and a big player in the coal market as the president and his company were, that you would be oblivious to what was going on the ground. That doesn't happen in the coal industry. And I've been part of the coal industry for the best part of 40 years.
Ted Bloom, Professor Hanyane and Sanusha Naidu. Sanusha, coming to you after the break. I want to get your sense of whether the president had only 5 options and the one that he took technically would have been the best one. All right, we'll continue in a moment. By the way, you want to hear more of that testimony, we will be playing it a little bit later on here on Newzroom Afrika channel 405 at 11 p.m. tonight, with a repeat a little bit later on as well in the early hours of the morning. But catch it again to hear what the president had to say at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture beginning at 11 p.m. tonight. In Focus continues in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back live on In Focus on Newzroom Afrika channel 405. Ted Bloom, Professor Hanyane and Sanusha Naidu with us tonight as we unpack more of what we heard today from the testimony of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Sanusha, the option was, I suppose, witness it, blow the whistle, or stay and resist. Which option did the president take in this particular one, and was it the correct option?
Good evening, Tabo, my colleagues and viewers. Yeah, I think he gave 5 options, and one that he chose was the one to stay within and hopefully reform from within. I'm not sure whether that was accomplished. I think staying within meant that he had to take a kind of different trajectory around whistleblowing, and whether or not he was able to achieve that remains to be seen, because I think when you listen to the evidence leaders and you listen to the way they've been putting the kind of architecture of the questions to him, and including the acting Chief Justice at times, where he also intervened and to ask the president in a very clear and coherent way, what were these boards doing, and what was the process within to hold these boards accountable? You kind of saw the president, fumble, if that's the right word to use, in trying to exercise what he thought was the correct mandate, the correct theoretical approach and the actual practical approach. So I think staying within and not resigning would have been one of those issues where he would have been able to say, you know what, I'm staying in, but I can actually shift this internally. Unfortunately, you don't get the sense of that. From what my colleagues are saying, from what we have now seen with hindsight, you don't get the sense that that option was the most valuable and utility option, in a sense that it achieved what he had sought to achieve. Maybe it was much bigger than him. Maybe the issues were much bigger. Maybe the dynamics in the party were much bigger than him. But if you come back to Prof's point earlier, I think, was it the fact that you stay in, you get to this point where you take on the presidency, both in the party and the state, and then, of course, hopefully use that as a springboard to where you want to see the country going. But it comes with a lot of different interpretation, but it also comes with, I think, a very low score on whether that option was the right option.
Yeah. Professor Hanyane, I mean, the president confronted with a lot of evidence of his own inaction, particularly when we heard of a number of things that were going on, for example, like at PRASA. But President, being the president, choosing to play the long game, even now as the president, still choosing to play the long game. I mean, pretty much saying, besides, as the ANC, there was no capacity within them to be able to investigate these claims. Institutions, security institutions and so forth would have needed to do those investigations. Did he manage to justify his inaction?
Thabo, I don't think so. I think it's more of saying, does he have a political plan personally? Is he ambitious to stay for the second term, if we have to stretch that argument there? Is he mindful of his own legacy? These are the issues that I suspect may preoccupy him, and of course preoccupied him before. The context is pretty much important here. I'm a little disappointed in the way in which he conflated the context as if today's observation reflected yesterday's observation. And yet there was this constant reference to say, remember, there was this 9 wasted years. I had my hands and feet tied. I could not move too much, but I was aware of certain things. For instance, how does he defend the deployment policy, knowing very well that during the 9 wasted years, that policy was in shambles? And at the same time acknowledging that here is a political party that cannot keep minutes. So how then all these contradictions sort of qualify a sense of purpose and, of course, laying the ground fertile for reform, both within the party as well as in government?
Yeah. And, I mean, it is quite disappointing to just learn that for so many years, I mean, for example, at PRASA, without a CEO, and he would say, well, as the party, there was nothing they could have done about it. Is he downplaying the political kind of influence that the party has on these parastatals and on these chairpersons of the boards?
Well, Thabo, look, I would buy into that open letter that he once penned to say the ANC is guilty as charged. And unfortunately, he doesn't seem to be consistent with that narrative, a narrative that says for so many ills, for so many mistakes, he did use that word mistakes today, but not in a profound way that says somehow the ball was dropped seriously, and then, of course, it opened the front door for all sorts of corruption, malfeasance, maladministration, purging of capable public servants, which in a sense bankrupt our public service and public sector.
Right. Ted, the president failing there to explain his support for the secondment of Brian Molefe at Eskom in 2015. What do you make of that particular story?
Okay, so yeah, I'm not quite sure exactly to what extent the president played a role there. He said that he endorsed Mr. Molefe's tenure, but I mean, he should have known, coming from the coal industry, that the Guptas had already made noises since 2010 to become major coal players within Eskom, which they eventually achieved under Brian Molefe, in fact. And it's very simple for me, very simple. In the last 60 days, the ANC, through Tebe Investments and Butter Trust, have invested again in the major coal supply agreement to Eskom. And on the first day that that agreement came into place, the price was nearly doubled. If there is no state capture, the president should come out tomorrow and cancel that agreement and say the ANC does not participate in supplying Eskom with coal and doubling the price on the first day. then I will believe the president and say he's got a lot of credibility. He now no longer has to keep quiet because he is in the prime position and he's doing things the right way and according to the conscience we expect of a person of that office to hold. That should be very simple. But as for the rest, as the professor said, it's all about innuendo and remembering and not remembering and influencing and maybe not influencing. Maybe I'm too dumb and stupid to be involved in those sort of games. For me, it's pretty much black and white. You do what's right, and if it's wrong, you don't do it. Full stop. You don't tolerate it. I've never tolerated the wrongdoing as far as I could see. I blew the whistle, and I've paid the price for that. Yeah. And you know what? I'm not actually sorry about that either, because at least my conscience is clean when I go to sleep at night.
So let's talk then about the Eskom war room. I mean, shall we take it from the president's testimony that that particular institution or structure was pretty much useless?
I think it was. Firstly, it didn't avert the problem. Secondly, I mean, everybody has known about Eskom's coal supply agreements from 2007, and that's where a lot of the reliability of the boilers and all those issues emanate from. Because if you put poor quality fuel into a boiler, it gives you lots of problems, and you'll never overcome them. That's the one issue. The other issue is I happened to see one of the war room documents. And at that stage, they seem to want to take stock of all the various generating options available to Eskom. In other words, they were looking for stuff in the pantry. And on that list was a power station, Ingakan, which was decommissioned in the late 80s and sold to the Chinese. And yet on that war room list, it was still listed as an option. I mean, the power station doesn't actually exist or did not exist at that stage. And yet somebody was playing games. Either Eskom wasn't doing quality control or somebody was, there was some tomfoolery going on or something. But the quality of the decision-making that came out of that war room, I think would leave a lot to be desired.
Sanusha, what do we make then of this current executive and its capacity to resist abuse and bring about change?
It doesn't bode well at times. I mean, I think right now what we are seeing is we are reflecting on the period in which the Zondo Commission is looking at in terms of state capture. But it also makes you wonder, I mean, given what Ted has just said about the fact that the party is still doing business with Eskom. That's really very, very, very important to bear in mind, that if indeed you are committed to the decision-making processes around dealing with state capture, dealing with clean governance, then of course the party should desist. And as the president of the party, he should be able to say that. But unfortunately, I think that it kind of tells you that the decision-making processes and the governance architecture and where you want the pulse points and the checkpoints and the levers to happen, it's not happening. And unfortunately, I think we have to now ask the question again is how committed they are to this governance. I think the real challenge right now is, again, the question of whether the party has to basically be this entity that has to constantly be devolved to and looked at in the context of saying, well, we have to keep seeing what this party wants us to say and do, or do we actually find that we can clip our wings from this party and start thinking independently of that party? So I think at the end of the day, the decision-making processes between party and state need to be really, I think there needs to be a kind of a delinking between the two. But at the same time, what we saw today when the president was speaking about the deployment committee, speaking about the top 6, etc., he still very much theoretically believes that there's a separation between party and state.
Let me thank you all for coming through this morning. We look forward to more of that testimony tomorrow at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. Ted Bloom, Professor Hanyane, and Sanusha Naidu, and of course